Hello, Guru Nation. Welcome back to the Clinical Trials Guru. This will also go on the podcast, Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. I believe it is episode 206 for the podcast, and of course it'll go on YouTube. I have Dr. Kinglsey on, founder and CEO of iAct Health. Dr. Kinglsey is a thought leader in this industry. He's an advocate for sites, I think, right? I don't want to speak for you.
I am.
You're at least a someone that sites should aspire to be like, I think. And we're going to get into your story. We met at the Viva Summit. I don't go to too many conferences, but that one I went to, and Dr. Kinglsey was there. We actually sat together on a round table, which was pretty cool. So let's get into your story and your background, because I don't think people really know that much. Again, I think I think you're an inspiration to a lot of sites and a lot of physicians also, because you're a physician. So let's get into your background. How did you get started? What was your background like? And then you became a doctor, and then how'd you get into research?
Ooh, wow. So you want background from pre-doctor?
Yes, I want the origin story, like a superhero origin.
The origin story. Coming out of middle school, I'll be brief. I'm really not going back to middle school. I wanted to be a doctor. And when I got into a pre-med program, I immediately got a job at a hospital, and I saw all of the downside of being a doctor. I saw the people rounding at 1 a.m. I saw the people getting divorced because they couldn't maintain a marriage and a physician's lifestyle at the same time. I saw the patients that died who shouldn't have. And I decided after 3 years, about 2.5 years of being pre-med and working in the hospital, that I did not want to be a doctor. And I dropped out of college. I quit at the hospital, and I started doing all sorts of other things. And I did all sorts of other things for a few more years before I got that bug in me again to be a doctor, because I really missed healthcare. I like taking care of people. And so I ended up going back to school to end up being a doctor again. I did a master's in biochemistry. My bachelor's ended up being in biology, chemistry, history, and cultural anthropology, and then went on to med school. So became a doctor, went on to be a family medicine doctor, went through residency, and I was hired as faculty immediately after residency. So then I was teaching young doctors. Became medical director of family medicine, medical director of urgent care, and started a research company. And when I started this research company, it was meant to be a hobby. Honestly, it wasn't meant to be a business. It wasn't meant to be a full-time gig. It was an idea that a friend of mine had, and it was a way to give back to the community, a way of giving free healthcare, advancing medical knowledge, but at the same time, no insurance companies, no copays, no cash register, just free health care to anybody in the community who wants to be considered. We would take walk-ins, anything. And it was meant to be something to do nights and weekends. So I was doing a normal medical practice, seeing patients, teaching residents. I was still doing obstetrics. I was delivering babies, doing nursing home rounds. And at the same time, I was doing clinical research side by side in separate companies. And with the side-by-side comparison, I was having way more fun doing research, and I was delivering, in my opinion, a higher level of healthcare. I'm giving people free care, no copay. In fact, I'm compensating them, and I'm spending more time with them. I'm spending more time teaching, educating them on why this research is being done, why we think this thing is the next best thing since sliced bread. And it was just game-changing for me. So in 6 months of doing them side by side, my hobby became my career. And I turned in my notice at the hospital for the directorships and the residency faculty position. And I've done nothing but research since. And that's 14 years ago.
Wow. So early on, first of all, how did you even get introduced to research? You said a friend of yours, it was his idea. How did that happen?
There was an intensivist at the hospital who was doing some sepsis research. And so I was familiar with his research, and I would refer patients into his research. I liked the medical background of the sepsis work that he was doing, so I was familiar. a research coordinator approached me and asked if I would be principal investigator on an anemia trial, and I said yes. And
that's a good coordinator.
Yes, yes. I said yes. That's the end of the story. The trial closed, did nothing.
Sure.
But that was I could be a principal investigator. That's, interesting. I was finished rounding on patients in the hospital about 7 p.m. and this other physician, Joe and I were sitting in the physician's lounge having a cup of coffee at the end of rounding on our patients. And Joe had the similar experience, and he's the one who said, why don't we do research? Why don't we do more research on the side? And I did 2 weeks worth of due diligence. 2 weeks later, I was with a commercial real estate agent and leasing real estate. I formed the Secretary of State, and I was off and running.
Wow.
It was an idea that it was a seed that planted, and I fell in love with it.
And where was this? What part of the country?
This was Columbus, Georgia.
Okay. That's a good story about that coordinator, because I teach my coordinators to always be recruiting new doctors. Like, if somebody's referring a lot of patients, they probably don't know that much about research. They don't understand that they could be a principal investigator. So it takes, you should take the initiative and go recruit them, because you can literally change their business, like in a few weeks. So very interesting. Did you have, when that initial coordinator reached out to you, did you have any reservations about, well, I don't know if I want to commit to being a PI, or did you have any of the usual things that I'm sure you get now when you approach physicians?
Right. I get the usual explanations every single time now, but no, I didn't. When she asked me, she was really asking me a favor, and I said, absolutely, I'll help you out. And it was a low bar of entry for me, but I recognize for physicians, clearly it's a high bar of entry, because consistently, when you talk to a physician about getting involved in research, you've got the common objections that always come up. Number one is always, I don't have time, right? That's the first objection is, I don't have time.
And the next one is, I'm scared of the FDA.
Exactly. The next one is liability. They think that research is high liability, and in fact, it's lower liability than running a regular medical practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of research naive doctors watching. There's a lot of study coordinators, site directors. So these are the objections you're going to get. These are probably 80% of the time in that order that Dr. Kinglsey just shared. Okay, so
if I could interject for a quick second, because you just teed that up beautifully. These are the objections you're going to get. If you're not already getting them, trust Dan. These are the objections you're going to get. And I had a gentleman who was a sales coach. I went to his lecture a few years ago, and he told stories about when he goes around coaching salespeople, and he'll say to the audience, "What are your common objections?" And within 2 minutes, they can all pencil out their common objections. And then he'll say to the audience, "Okay, so what's your counter?" And you can hear crickets.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, now wait a minute. You know that these are your common objections that you get all the time, and yet you haven't practiced how to counter the objection? And so I want to encourage everybody out there, if you know that physicians are always going to say, I don't have the time, I think it's high liability, whatever the objections are that you're getting, practice why that's not the case. It will serve you well. You need to have those responses at the ready.
Absolutely. I'm all into sales. I tell everyone who starts a site, I don't care what you did before, doctor, nurse, CRA, coordinator. Once you start a site, you become a salesperson. That's it. I don't care if you like that idea or you don't. That is your number one job at that point, is you become a salesperson.
Sure.
So a lot of CRAs that open sites struggle because they've been spoon-fed their entire career. You're going to go to this site, you're going to do this, you're going to get a paycheck. And that's the model they follow for 10 years. And then they go open their own site. They know how to run the site, more or less. They're not really screwing up there. They're screwing up on the sales side. They don't know how to be a salesperson. You have to be extremely persuasive, extremely resilient. You're going to get way more no's than yeses. Even someone in your position, Dr. Kinglsey, I mean, you're like a preferred site now for so many sponsors. I'm sure you still get rejected all the time, right? Yeah, and us too. So very interesting takeaway there for everyone listening or watching. I wanted to get into. Oh, I have a question for you. So, and we're gonna get into one of your favorite topics, which is pay for performance. Right? We kind of did a sneak peek video of that at the Viva Summit.
Yep.
A precursor to that topic, or that can of worms, is do you think we have enough physicians participating in research right now, or do we need more? Are we always needing more?
I'll give you a two-part answer, and they kind of dovetail. Let me start with the one I actually care about. We have too few experienced physicians in research today. Bottom line. Tufts University publishes this data every single year, right? The churn rate of physicians in clinical research, and right now it's 51%. The one and dones. 51% of docs that get involved in research do one trial, fail within 1 year, never do a second trial.
51. That number used to be higher.
No, it used to be lower.
Oh, okay. Really?
So
okay.
A few years ago it was 49, then it was 50, now it's 51. Right now it's getting worse.
Okay.
51% churn rate of doctors in research. They look at it and they think, hey, this is going to be easy, and they get involved in research and say, whoa, that was a lot more complicated than I thought. It is more regulatory burden than I thought. I wasn't able to pick the right trials. I wasn't able to be profitable, whatever the case may be. And those are the common reasons why physicians fail out of research. That's equivalent to the churn rate of wait staff in a restaurant. We're experimenting on human beings. Wait staff in a restaurant. Wait staff in a restaurant, your waitress or waiter leaves you, you hire a new waitress to backfill.
Right.
Principal investigators in clinical research. You have that churn rate. The only way you can combat that churn rate and continue your pipeline in R&D is to backfill with novice investigators continuously. That's a Band-Aid, not a fix. And so our industry today is backfilling that churn rate by convincing new novice docs to say, yes, I'm willing to give it a shot. That means that nearly half of all the research being done is being done by physicians with less than 1 year worth of experience.
Right.
That's unacceptable. That Band-Aid does not work. The source problem is that physicians are failing in clinical research. The solution is not to talk more docs into saying yes. The solution is to set docs up for success so that you end up with more docs in research. You reduce the churn rate. You end up with more physicians that have multi-year experience as a principal investigator, and you elevate the entire field.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think companies like yours, like mine, I mean, we work with a lot of research naive physicians, so everyone's research naive at some point. I mean, you were research naive, right? You have to either luck into a situation where you're going to be guided by someone like you guys, someone like us, or it's just an entrepreneurial physician who's going to do what it takes to succeed. Right. And I talk to a lot of doctors these days, and they say the days of the entrepreneurial physician are going away. You have a lot of these people coming out of med school that all they're looking for is to get hired by a hospital, and these hospitals are buying up all the medical practices, and we don't have those entrepreneurial physicians. So according to that theory, this churn rate could be worse if the solution is let's just convince more research-naive physicians to do research. So I think that is part of the answer, like you said. The second part, which is extremely important, and it's where all the work has to go into, is training them and setting them up for success.
Completely true.
Right?
Completely true. I was at a conference earlier this year, and we were talking about patients. I was in the audience, and the panel was talking about patients and the lost to follow-up rate, and how do you nurture patients and keep them engaged in your research trial so that they don't get bored, they don't just simply disappear, that they stay engaged in the process. And the panel was talking about reaching out to them on a regular basis and setting them up for success and providing all of the support that they need so that research is not a burden on them. And then the conversation turned and people started talking about, well, what about physicians? How do we get more physicians involved? And my comment to the group was, treat them just like you treat the patients. Set them up for success.
So we need to get physician-centric.
Do all the heavy lifting. Hand them everything on a silver platter, not literally, figuratively, but do the heavy lifting. Help them with finding the best of the best trials. Help them to say no to trials that they're not going to be successful on. Help them to say yes on the trials that they will be successful on. Help them to understand the nuances of a research trial. Hold their hand when they're having to meet with a monitor, because UCRAs are scary. Physicians don't, as a physician in regular medical practice, you may go your entire career without being audited. But an audit to a physician is a big deal. An insurance audit or a Medicare audit is a big deal.
Huge.
And you enter research, you're audited routinely. You've got CRAs coming in every single week, taking a look and telling you everything that you did wrong. If you're a high enroller, you've got sponsor audits, IRB audits, CRO audits, let alone FDA audits. Physicians aren't used to that. And that level of regulatory burden and scrutiny is scary to them. Hold their hand, nurture them, and you'll help set up physicians for success.
Yeah. With IACT, I guess I want to get into your vision, because I wanted to ask you this during the conference. There just wasn't enough time. What is your vision for IACT Health? Are you guys looking to expand aggressively, or what's your vision?
Well, those are two completely separate questions.
Right.
I'll take the easier one first. Are we looking to expand? Yes. Big time. We just acquired a company last month in Virginia. Great company. The physician had built a great research site for 7 years, and we'll assist him with taking it to the next level. We're in due diligence with 3 other companies right now. So yes, we're looking to expand, and we're looking to expand aggressively. Now, completely separate question. What's my vision for the future? Research sites are the most fragmented, the most immature segment of our industry. Research sites, I run into research sites all the time that have no infrastructure whatsoever. They're not using technology. They have one person that's holding it together by grit.
Yeah.
Who's doing all the contract and budget and all the regulatory and doing the BD and being that salesperson you were alluding to earlier and holding the whole thing together by their own will. That's not a business. That's a person that's created something of value. But if that person dies tomorrow, the business evaporates tomorrow. Research sites shouldn't exist like that. And so my vision is to mature research sites. My vision is to professionalize the site aspect of our industry and to dramatically raise the bar. In 5 years, I want to see that different paradigm where we have more of a pay-for-performance model, and sites that can't perform well should stop doing research. And sites that can perform and prove it with metrics should be paid handsomely for the fact that they are premium providers, and completely change how research is happening in the world.
Right. Now, we can get into pay. That's a good vision. So you plan to spearhead this? Do you work with research-naive physicians, or are you only looking? Yeah? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, us too. I mean, it's more challenging for sure, but it could be more rewarding because you can get in earlier and you leverage your value. I mean, you have way more value at that point versus what they can provide, but as opposed to acquiring or partnering an experience site. This pay-for-performance thing, it opens up a can of worms. I mean, I'm all for it, but you said something very interesting at the Viva Summit. You said sites are de-incentivized or disincentivized to not perform well, just perform average, right? Because you're going to save more money and make the same, right?
I believe it. And by all means, I don't think it's conscious. I don't think sites are consciously saying, I'm gonna minimally serve my customer.
It's financial.
It's unconscious behavior.
Yeah.
And it's no different than taxes and tax breaks, right? The government tries to manipulate public behavior by the use of positive and negative stimulants. This is the same. When you look at research contracts today, I'm paid to do a procedure. I'm paid to do a physical exam. If I do an outstanding physical exam and I spend tons of time really listening to the heart and discerning a heart murmur or really paying attention to the neurologic exam, I get paid exactly the same amount as if I do an average physical exam, as if I do a crappy physical exam. If I do the phlebotomy and it lyses, it hemolyzes, it clots, I get paid the same as if I do a high quality phlebotomy. If I do phlebotomy and I use a 22 gauge needle and I end up lysing a bunch of blood cells versus I have a really high quality phlebotomist who can use a 16 gauge needle, I get a better sample. I get paid the same regardless. Unconsciously, what that does is it drives the industry to average performance. If you invest in higher levels of performance, higher quality, faster timelines, faster responsiveness, that's expensive. It requires a larger headcount to respond faster. It requires higher paid, more experienced individuals to produce higher quality. If in fact the industry isn't paying us for that, we are incentivized to not do those things. If you invest in higher quality, you're reducing your profit margin. And the industry's common counter is, no. We also pay for quality. And in fact, if you don't give us good quality, we'll stop giving you trials. No. I would argue that any of us who've been in the industry for a long time know that your quality has to be really, really bad to stop getting trials. Mm-hmm. If your quality is average, if your quality is below average, but you can still provide the patients, you'll get the trials.
Right.
That should not be the case. That paradigm needs to change. If you can't produce high quality, because what the industry needs is enrollment, quality, adherence to timelines, customer service, what I call EQTCS. Everyone in my company can say EQTCS because that's what our customers need.
Enrollment, quality,
timelines, and customer service.
Customer service, okay.
Yep, EQTCS. What they pay us for is exclusively E. Enroll patients, do physical exams, draw blood, do urinalyses. They pay us for E. They want QTCS, and they don't incentivize sites to do so. And for sites to perform on the other three of that four, we have to increase our costs without getting any sort of increase to our contracts and budgets because the contracts and budgets are held down by the FMV paradigm.
Right. And you're speaking actually at ClinBiz conference. I saw that. Yeah, with Deborah. I interviewed her once. She's a good person to get to know. But yeah, I hear you, Dr. Kingsley, but enrollment is always going to be a distant number one. And then all these other things, it's almost like I wouldn't say negligible, but like they'll deal with you not having great quality as long as you're enrolling. I don't think that's ever going away necessarily.
And I think it should.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly. What they care about first and foremost is enrollment.
Right.
And it should be that way. They need to care more about the quality of the data. The way the industry works today is sites produce average quality.
Right.
And
what do you mean by average quality? Can you give us like some tangible, real world things we can point at?
Sure. There's random error and non-random error, right? Black swan events are random error. Random things happen. Nothing you can do about random things. Non-random error is things that you should have been able to eliminate. If a site has poor policies and procedures, it will consistently produce errors that should have been able to be eliminated. Classic example is informed consent. How do you make an informed consent error? How do you miss putting the date on page 17? How do you miss checking the box on page 15 that said whether or not the patient wanted their primary care provider notified of the research trial?
Mm-hmm. How do you miss reconsenting on a new ICF, right?
Those are examples of errors that should be driven to zero. Those errors should be unacceptable.
So those are non-random errors.
That's sloppy.
Uh-huh.
That's a lack of process, a lack of procedure.
I see.
To be able to create errors like that. Those are examples of errors that sites produce all the time, and it should be unacceptable. And so what the industry does today is they pay CROs or their own internal teams to send CRAs, put them on a plane, pay for a plane ticket, get them a rental car, put them in a hotel room,
Well-paid CRA, well-paid
CRAs, to find those kinds of mistakes. And now think about it. Once the mistake is made, you can't erase it. The job of the CRA is to find it and shine it up like an apple and put an explanation on why it happened and why it's not going to happen again. That, again, is a Band-Aid and not a solution. The solution is prevent the sites from ever making those mistakes in the first place. But sites aren't paid to prevent mistakes. They're paid to give you a urinalysis.
Right.
Pay the sites for the quality of the data. Pay them enough to be able to employ their own QA, QC staff to reduce the error rate in the first place. You would reduce the R&D spend to CROs or to the sponsor's own internal QA, QC teams, and you wouldn't be clarifying errors once they happened. You'd be preventing errors in the first place. And that's how we run ICUs. It's how we run ORs. It's how we put rockets into space. We don't accept errors.
So bring like a Six Sigma approach to research sites.
If you're running an OR, you're driving to Six Sigma levels of quality. You don't accept breaches in sterility.
Sure.
But in research, we do.
So how come? Why have we not moved towards this? Because I've been doing this for 13 years, and it's always been this way. At least I think. I mean, when I first started, I had no idea what pay for performance or enrollment was. I was just happy I got a budget. But as I started looking at these things, I see like FMV has been around for as far as I can remember, right?
Yeah.
So why haven't they moved to quality or pay for performance in all this time? I mean, technology's there now. You can track all these metrics.
Because it's hard. Because it's hard. Honestly, that's why it hasn't happened yet. Not because people don't see the logic in it, but because it's hard. The site landscape is incredibly fragmented. Mm-hmm. There aren't enough physicians, something that you mentioned 10, 15 minutes ago. There aren't enough physicians. So if you raise the bar for performance, what's the potential ripple effect? You end up with fewer physicians. Well, we can't have fewer physicians because then our R&D pipeline slows down.
Right.
We're desperate for physicians. We need sites to say yes. We can't figure out as an industry which sites are going to consistently perform and which sites won't. So if I had my crystal ball or my magic 8, and I knew that these 10 sites would perform, I only need 10 sites on my research trial. But I don't. This doesn't work. And so I hire 20 sites in the hopes that I close to enrollment on my desired timeline. And so because of that, the industry is unconsciously nervous about the idea of raising the bar of professionalism. These two things fight each other.
What about regulations? Like pharma, they seem to be concerned about, physician compensation, Sunshine Act. So if pay for performance can be misconstrued as I'm favoring this doctor versus, this other doctor, when you can even argue that you're paying based on metrics. But I mean, do you think that's like one of the biggest issues preventing this from being implemented?
Yes. I think the first issue is, frankly, it's hard.
Right.
Honestly.
Yeah.
It requires a whole lot of work to be able to build out an infrastructure to figure out premium providers and pay them as such. But you're right. The second barrier is the regulatory. David Volcano is a good friend of mine, and we were at a conference together a few months ago. And David said a quick little sentence that was so profound. Nobody ever gets in trouble for paying average.
Yeah, that's true.
Paying a premium provider average, no one ever gets in trouble for that. But if you pay somebody premium, you're at risk of being accused of overpaying. You're at risk for being accused of breaking those regulatory standards. And so it's added risk to a sponsor to agree to a budget that's above fair market value. And so you're right, that's the second barrier to them paying differently. Sunshine Act, I think, is an excuse to paying more. It's an added It's an added liability in that there's public dissemination of information, and there's an increased likelihood that someone waves a flag and says, wait a minute, you paid this one doc $1 million, explain it. And so it adds an extra layer, but the fundamental thing isn't Sunshine Act, it's OIG. It's fair market value. Can you prove that you paid fair market value for the services rendered? If you've got the metrics, it'll stand up to the test. If you've got the metrics to prove it, then you can justify that that was fair market value. But it's extra work.
Mm-hmm.
Just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not what we're supposed to do.
Right. And who's we? Is it the industry? Like, who stands to benefit from this, really? I mean,
all of us.
Everyone, right?
All of us, the entire industry. So think about it. Think about it. It takes 15 years to get a new drug to market. About half is preclinical, about half is clinical.
Right.
You've got Tufts looking at it. You've got investment banks looking at it. They all agree it should take about half as long. It shouldn't take 15 years. With efficiency, it should take 7.5 years. The cost of getting a new drug to market, the cost of getting an FDA approval, all inclusive, right? What's the R&D spend for every yes at FDA? $2.9 billion. It shouldn't cost that. It shouldn't take that length of time. If you invent the cure to cancer today, it's 15 years before it reaches the patients that need it. Right. That's unacceptable. Right. If we raise the bar and had professionals throughout the entire vertical, nothing but experienced research sites with great amounts of support and serious infrastructure, we could dramatically reduce the time in R&D. We could enroll patients faster with cleaner data, which requires less time in cleaning, less time to database lock, fewer queries, accelerate the entire thing. Overall, you reduce the R&D spend. That's a win for everybody.
Right. And I want to talk about virtual trials because what you're saying makes sense. What I and many others fear is rather than getting to this pay for performance, which is great. I mean, who doesn't like meritocracy? Well, actually, there's many that don't, but I do.
Sure.
But rather than getting there, what's more likely to happen is virtual trials displacing the traditional site models. And I don't know if it was you that shared this story at the Viva Summit. I think it was you. There was like a patient blogger somewhere.
Yep.
Right? Can you tell that story? Because I thought it was fascinating. Because the biggest I guess argument against virtual trials, in my opinion, has always been, yeah, but patients need to trust their doctor to do a study. They're not going to trust Pfizer. They're not going to trust J&J. I mean, these pharma companies are hated. So, but what you discussed at the conference was patient influencers, patient engagers, and that to me becomes very real. So can you share that story? I think it was you, right?
It was.
Okay.
It was. Yeah, by all means. So you are correct. You are correct about the industry seeking ways to bypass doctors, to bypass sites and go direct to patient. It's the same stimulus. Sites aren't performing to the needs of the industry, and so the industry is seeking ways to bypass sites to be able to accelerate R&D. My argument is not only, I believe in virtual clinical trials. I believe that the solution is both elevate site performance, and I think virtual clinical trials are a huge benefit. So let's talk about virtual clinical trials. The gold standard, in my opinion, of a virtual clinical trial is when a patient can enter a trial and never go into a physical facility, or almost never go into a physical facility. Patient could enter a research trial and be consented at home, sent a device, check their own blood pressure at home. Everything is Bluetooth enabled, Wi-Fi enabled, centrally read by an experienced principal investigator who's overseeing all the patients in a state or all the patients in multiple states. That's the gold standard of a virtual clinical trial. And then there's a lot of conversation about hybrid virtual clinical trials, where some of the visits are in a brick and mortar facility, a traditional research site, and you've got an increased amount of patient reported outcomes and an increased amount of research that's happening in the patient home. I believe that it is going to happen. And I believe it's a benefit for patients and a benefit for the industry. But the stimulus is that sites are underperforming. If sites were performing, no one would bother taking on the expense or effort of creating virtual clinical trials. The stimulus is sites are underperforming. So let's talk about the example that I gave. I met a gentleman who does patient education, patient blogging. He started in migraine. He has 7 million migraine sufferers consuming content on his webpage. 7 million. I asked him how engaged they are. He has 35,000 people who read content on his site, engage on his site more than 3 times a week. 35,000 who are engaging with migraine-related material more than 3 times a week. Those aren't people that get a migraine a month. Those are people that are suffering from migraines and are truly engaged in migraine. Those are patients who would readily say, I would love to be in a research trial. Yes, please.
Especially if it's coming from him.
Right? Yes. Those are patients who would not be lost to follow-up. Those are patients who would engage in the research process. 35,000. I then asked him, what % of your patients? I said, you know where they all live? He said, yes. You've got demographics on them? Yes. Have you ever looked at what % of them live someplace where they could go into a research trial? He said, yes. 2%. 2% of the 35,000 live someplace where there's a migraine research trial they can avail themselves of. 98% don't. Virtual clinical trials fixes that. Brick and mortar, 2% of his patients live someplace where they can go into a research trial. Virtual clinical trials, you could go to him and do a migraine trial, and he could push it out to the 7 million people, 35,000 of which are engaging 3 times a week. If you need 600 patients for your research trial, do you think you can get 600 patients from 35,000, let alone 7 million?
Right, yeah, because 2% of his 35,000 is 350. I mean, you could fill a phase 3 study with just him.
With brick and mortar.
Right, with brick and mortar, without virtual trials.
With virtual clinical trials, you could do a multi-thousand patient phase 3 trial, and you could enroll your trial in weeks, not years. You could put thousands of patients in a matter of weeks.
Has he partnered with
virtual clinical trials?
Has he partnered with any pharma or CRO? I mean, he's better than Accurian. I mean, forget about Accurian and Study.
But it only works. It only works when you get virtual clinical trials. It doesn't work with brick and mortar. And so virtual clinical trials is going to be game-changing for our industry, and it's going to put sites at risk. And the problem is site performance. If you want to survive as a site, you better increase your performance or you're going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm. Are you worried about the future of iAct Health? Are you guys going to have to pivot? Or, I mean, you're one of the better sites, right? So, what should one of the average sites be feeling right now?
Get better.
Get better. Is there a reward to getting better?
Average is not good enough. One of the things I say, and I say it in an inflammatory way because I want people to be inflamed, we're experimenting on human beings. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. Average should not be the bar. Average should not be acceptable. Now, for the statisticians out there, they're cringing right now because everything is always average. If you raise performance, there's still an average. You can never get a from being a bell-shaped curve. But the level of performance we accept in our industry today should not be acceptable. And so if you're a site out there and you feel that you have average performance, if you feel that you're about the same as all the other sites, that's not good enough because site performance is not good enough today. All of us should be aggressively pursuing improvements in infrastructure, adherence to new technology standards, better training standards, QA, QC paradigms in your own sites, QAing your own data, not waiting for a CRA to.
That's what I've been doing now.
Yes, raise the bar. We need to.
Yes, and nobody really knows what. I think raising the bar on patient safety, I mean, it's important for everything, but I don't, even these average sites, I don't think anyone really skimps on patient safety. I think what they skimp on is maybe returning an email to a CRA in a week as opposed to in a day, or entering data in 3 days as opposed to 24 hours. I think that's where they kind of cut corners. I don't think any PI is going to cut corner on safety necessarily, even if they're below average.
I agree and disagree. No one consciously cuts corners on safety. That I agree with. No, not no one.
Very
There
few.
are there are
Very
malicious
few.
people out there.
Sure.
Very few people would ever consciously cut corners on patient safety. What they are doing, however, is the economic model for running a research site is so tough that they're running on as small a staff size as possible. They're not investing in QA/QC. They're not investing in eSource and eReg and better policies and procedures. And so it's the errors that happen that shouldn't happen because your coordinator was over capacity or because your system was set up to allow errors to happen. You're running an oncology trial and the primary endpoint is tumor burden, and your coordinator forgot to order the CT scan while he or she was moving so fast through patient visits. The CT scan was critical for the primary endpoint, and you missed ordering the CT scan. It's not intentional malicious behavior,
Right.
but it's behavior that should be able to be eliminated by increasing professionalism of sites.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I agree. Well, good point. I mean, good points. It's going to be interesting to see, but do you think there will be a place for hybrid virtual trials? Like, let's fast forward to 2028. Okay, 10 years from now, and we're not fortune tellers, but you go to enough conferences to, I guess, be in discussions with these thought leaders and policymakers in the industry. 2028, are most studies virtual trials?
Yes. Yes. Most studies are virtual trials. And I agree with you that we're going to take baby steps and it'll be hybrid trials.
Right.
I don't think in 2028 most trials will be completely done in a patient's home.
Okay.
Nor do I think in 2028 research sites won't exist. Research sites will exist.
So you're not worried about iAct Health?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Cardiothoracic surgery trials are never going to be virtual clinical trials. You're not going to do CT surgery in a patient's living room. Early phase work is higher risk. It requires higher touch. Those trials are more apt to remain brick and mortar research site types of trials. Later phase work, real world evidence. Later phase work, much more likely to move toward hybrid virtual clinical trials first, and then to virtual clinical trials. Drop the hybrid. That we will see in the next 10 years. Phase 4 work is teed up to move rapidly to a virtual world.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. So where will iAct Health, what will iAct's health role be in this new world?
So if you're doing hybrid virtual trials, let alone virtual trials, you still need a principal investigator. Huh. We mentioned 40 minutes ago that we discussed, are there too few principal investigators? And one of my arguments is there are too few experienced principal investigators. If you eliminate brick and mortar, you can improve efficiency for an experienced principal investigator. Rather than seeing a few research patients a day in a brick and mortar facility, you could have a principal investigator, an experienced principal investigator who's overseeing patients across a large geography. So virtual trials didn't eliminate the need for a PI, but rather you maximize the efficiency of a very experienced PI. You still need coordinators, but their roles and responsibilities become a little bit different. Rather than a coordinator putting a blood pressure cuff on and doing vital signs and doing all of the stuff that coordinators do today, you've got coordinators that through a virtual trial interface, through a Skype or a piece of software, they're interacting with patients. They're assisting the patient with collecting their vital signs, with drug accountability, with drug adherence, with all of those things, but through a piece of technology. You've got experienced people who can now be maximized and used to maximal efficiency in our industry. The roles don't go away, they change.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how. I agree with you. Everything changes. This is definitely going to change. I think we're in an economy where the middleman is being cut out of everything. So in research, I mean, we kind of are the middleman. There's the CRO, there's the sites. It's really the sponsor and the patients that are the two endpoints, right? And everyone in the middle gets displaced at some point.
Well, you either provide value or you're unnecessary if you're in the middle. Because you're right.
Out. Yeah.
It's the sponsor and the patient are the two most important stakeholders, and the people in between need to offer enough value to justify their existence.
Well, hopefully we didn't scare too many doctors away.
Scare people away. Remember, I adore research. I don't just love research. I adore research, and I would encourage anybody and everybody to get involved in research. I think it's a wonderful way of medical care. I think there are economic benefits, there are emotional benefits. You're changing the future of healthcare. You're being a scientist. I do not want to scare anybody away.
Right. So it's still a good time to get in if you
Absolutely.
have the right situation. And
Absolutely.
just as soon as you get in, work on becoming an elite site so
Yes.
that when the displacement does occur, if you're not one of the ones being displaced,
Yeah.
right? That's basic business sense.
Well, change is the only constant. Constant. It's not if it's going to happen. It is happening. It's always happening. It's a matter of whether or not you're going to look it in the eyes.
Sure.
It's either going to happen to you or you're going to assist in making the change that you want to see happen in your industry.
And these could be good changes. I mean, we could be creating a bigger pie. I mean, there might be more studies, and then you still will
Absolutely.
need the traditional brick and mortar site. So, yeah, I don't think. I mean, I'm trying to sort of look into the future, but this is not meant as an alarmist conversation. I
Nope,
think it's
really
still a
not.
good time to get into research. Let's talk. We have like 5 more minutes, maybe. Can we talk a little bit about you have a YouTube channel? I forgot to mention it at the beginning.
Ooh.
When did you start that? Why did you start that? Who's your audience?
Anybody and everybody. So I started it several months ago. We largely ignored marketing and social media for a decade or more. It was just, I think, mid last year that we started paying attention much to social media. And my passion is teaching. I've always enjoyed teaching. I used to be a teacher. It was one of the reasons I fell in love with research, was to be able to teach patients more. And so when we took that on last year, someone had the idea of me starting to vlog, starting to do a video blog on a regular basis. I loved the idea. We took it on, and we produce a new segment per week. Been doing it for several months now and loving it. Tons of fun. And so I do speak off the cuff. If I have some patient interactions that remind me of a real aha moment that I would love the world to hear about, then maybe I produce a segment that week that's speaking to patients. And I'll say, okay, patients, I'm speaking to you today, and I'll talk about that and teach them. The piece I did last week was about patient compensation and talking about how patients get in research and the balancing act between coercion and compensating a patient for their legitimate costs and what they're giving of themselves to be in a research trial, and that balancing act. And so we do it every week, and some of them are aimed at physicians, some at industry, some at patients.
Okay. And what is it called? I always butcher the name. It's a good concept. You're in your car and you're recording, but what is it called?
Riding in Cars with Researchers. Riding in Cars with Researchers.
Right. I don't know how many times I've tried to get that right. I don't know why I can't get it. But it's a good concept. Maybe you'll get sponsored one day by BMW or Mercedes-Benz. That'd be cool.
Nice.
Great. Very good. Riding in Cars with Researchers. This was a great podcast. I mean, we could have gone another hour.
Easily.
Easily. We got to do it again. And then we got to talk off camera about a conference I'm planning. Hopefully we can pull it off.
Yep.
But it's always good. If you ever go to a conference, chances are Dr. Kingsley's there, right? Is that fair to say?
By all means, look me up.
I mean, all of them. I'm surprised you're not at Magi West right now in San Diego.
Busy, man.
Yeah, I know. I'm surprised I'm not there either. It's like an hour away from me. All right, so network with Dr. Kingsley. Reach out to him. Where can people find you? Where do you prefer they go?
Anywhere. I'm very active on all social media channels today. Anybody can email me. People email me all the time. Honestly, I respond to everybody. jkingsley@iacthealth.com. People can look me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I respond to everybody. I love interactions. I love teaching. I love helping others.
Cool. I will put the websites and the emails underneath the YouTube and on the podcast descriptions. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Dr. Kinglsey. We got to do more of these. This is fantastic. And
Excellent.
We'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.